compression settings do you recommend to give shape to a reverb?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. In my YouTube tutorials, as well as I'm in my mixing Bible, I explain the concept to compress reverbs so that you can have a lot of reverb, but whenever the dry signal is dense and loud, the reverb is compressed. That means that if you have the dry signal, the clap or whatever, the reverb is starting at the soft level because it's compressed and then it is coming up. In some reverbs like Lexicon, you have the shape algorithm. That thing is doing this already. But in many reverb units, the reverb is just always starting immediately on with a compressor and some compression. You just get it down whenever the dry signal is loud. And so which settings are good? Well, if we have a loud dry signal, we want the reverb to be reduced immediately. So short attack. And if your compressor has the function to look a little bit to the earlier parts of the sound, this is called look ahead, which is no problem in digital anymore, then I would even use look ahead. And then I like a slow release, because whenever the dry signal is gone, I don't want my reverb to pump up immediately. Maybe on drum, shorter release time could also work, but usually longer release, short attack. Use the lookup and then everything is great.
I have one question regarding dynamics, physical integrity, and how to set up the compressor. What do you do with a recording that contains really soft and really loud passages? If you just set up the compressors for the loud parts, they won't really be affecting the soft parts. So if you have recordings with huge dynamic range, do you do fader rides, normalize parts before compressing? Do you use a leveler? Which one? Or something else?
Yeah, that is really a problem. If the dynamic range is big, that could be in some jazz songs. The drummer has a solo. You might have the greatest snare compression ever, and then he gets in the solo, and all the snare hits and toms hits are just 10 or 20 dB louder. And then whatever your great compressor was doing, but now it's just over compressing. Or you might have this in a pop vocal track where the singer is singing gently at the moderate level in the verse, but then in the chorus, just everything is louder. And one thing that maybe some of you don't like to hear, this problem is not so much a problem with analog compressors, because on the analog compressor you just make the setup of the compressor at the medium level, and then if it gets super loud, well, yes, the compressor is doing a lot, but it always sounds very musical. And this is actually where you can really see or hear the difference between plugins and analog compressors very good. Use a dynamic track. It's very easy to set it up on the analog compressors, and you never ever can do this with a digital plugin. Now, with a digital plugin, whenever it would be super loud, the digital plugin would overcompress always. But you could automate it. That's the advantage in digital. You just automate the threshold to be higher on the louder part so that you always get your gain reduction that sounds great. So automating threshold is something that I really do a lot. Another option, moreover, in the example of this pop track where the vocal track has too much dynamic, I would actually really do pre-automation with clip gain or with a trim plugin that comes before my compressor. Because yeah, if she sings at the medium level, let's make her 3 dB louder, and maybe in the chorus, let's make it 3 dB softer, so that more or less we have an equal level, which at the end of the mix, we anyway need everything with more or less an equal level. I mean, in pop, we need equal levels, otherwise we could not listen our pop song in the car. So pre-automation would also work. I don't use leveler plugins so much because I don't really like what they do, because finally they simulate a fader. But if I write the fader, it's usually better, because finally a leveler plugin is also kind of a compressor, because it needs to detect when something is loud or soft, and then it reacts. It just usually reacts slower, but it's always too late. And yeah, I really think pre-automation, or then let's automate the threshold of the compressor, and then everything is good.
There was one thing I was curious about, however. In the reverb lesson, I remember you saying how important it is to not lower the volume of the reverb, even though the source should stay in front. But how can I keep the reverb at a loud level and make sure the source does not go to the back?
This is I think, very important, a really good question. And maybe you have to rewatch the lessons several times until you fully understand. I even read in an engineering forum, or was it in a book, a rule that if you want to have your source at the back, you should use a lot of reverb, and if you want to have your source totally dry, you should reduce the reverb or not even use any reverb. And that would be just the most stupid advice that you could give to somebody, because if you reduce reverb, what you get is a small sound, and you get an isolated sound that basically glues in the speakers or even falls out on the speakers. It doesn't work that way. If you listen big American mixes, the vocal is always in front, but it always has a lot of reverb. So the goal must be, when we want to have something in front, it's not to reduce reverb. That would like be if you are at a live concert and for whatever reason you want to have the singer close to you. Well, what you would do is you would sit totally in front. The singer is anyway in front of the stage, and so you are very close together, and then you hear her or him close. But if you want to hear him or her close, you would not kill all the walls of that room. That would make no sense. That would be like singing then outside, where you have no reflection, where it doesn't sound nice anymore. If we actually reduce reverbs, it would really be like if we would deconstruct the walls in a concert room just because we want a dry sound. No, we just have to get closer, but all the wall reflections are still there. They just come later. This is basically all the magic and all the secret. If we want to have something close to us in a mix, we need to reconstruct what would happen in a real room if the guy would come close. And that's all we have to do. And the simple answer, what do you do in a reverb? Add pre-delay. The pre-delay is the most important thing. If your dry signal comes, and then maybe 100 milliseconds later the reverb thing starts, then you have simulated, like if somebody is singing close to your ear in a large concert room, because then you would hear this singing immediately, and you would have to wait for maybe 100 milliseconds until the first reflection is coming. And we just reconstruct this with pre-delay. And the second thing is, add shape, so that the reverb builds up more slowly. This also adds directivity or closeness. Maybe add distortion to your reverb. That would simulate as if we would have room microphones. And if we use tube mics for room microphones, we have a more aggressive sound, but it does less, it does not so much interfere with the close sound. And we get some differences in the reverb sound by creating a little bit harmonic distortion. And if we create differences in the reverb, our source has not so much a problem to stay in front. And finally, the reason why very often if we mix digital in the box, that if we have a dry signal and a lot of reverb, that we feel that the dry signal is sucked out to the back, is also that those digital reverbs sound too close to the original, and then they start to get like in a fight, and then it seems that the close signal gets closer to the reverb, meaning it gets in the back. With the tools I just said now, pre-delay, shape, distortion, you can basically make it better. But then we also have to accept, usually with outboard reverbs, it's not so much a problem for whatever reason. We don't know the reason, but it's a basic fact.